The town of Albi is dominated by the massive cathedral of Saint Cirq. Built in the 13th century, unusually of red bricks, it has an incredibly impressive entrance. As usual, there are a lot of people about. Wonderful stonework. Inside, it's even more impressive. The altar and this wonderful stonework all the way around it. Halfway down the cathedral there is this additional stonework which is really quite beautiful. Around the sides of the cathedral there are some beautiful chapels. The paintings and the artwork is quite magnificent. Outside in the lovely sunshine we go round to the side of the cathedral and have a look over the magnificent River Tarn. The bridge, you can see, dates back to quite a few hundred years and is still perfectly usable for traffic. There are also some quite beautiful gardens. These have been here for, again, hundreds of years. Faithfully tended and looked after. They really are quite magnificent. We walked around the old town looking at the quaint medieval streets. Our guide waffling on about the history of some of the buildings, little lanterns or lamps. But dominating everywhere is this huge cathedral. Almost every street we turned to, there was the cathedral powering over everything. Unbelievable. Our delightful French guide telling us about the history of that particular building. We aimlessly wander along, and then we came to a very nice little church that had a history all of its own. It was very impressive. We stood under the cloisters because the sun was fairly hot that day and listened to the history and to the traditions. See those flying buttresses there holding everything up. There she is. Some lovely gardens and one last look at the cloisters. We make our way. This time we're going down a street that's lined with very large iron balls for some reason or other. Onto the river itself, where there's a mill and a weir in the background, which is very impressive. And a dog barking. Last look at the cathedral before we're in the coach and on our way. We spent a number of hours in the coach, but the countryside was lovely. And our guide filled us in on all sorts of things.
That's coffee. And then you've got portions of coffee in it and sausage.
And we arrived at the wonderful old town of Narjec, sited on the top of a conical hill, and a castle surmounts everything. It's a little bit dull that morning, so by a bit of trickery we can see what it looks like in sunshine. Extraordinary. Imagine building a castle on the top of a hill. Narjec had some lovely old buildings, full of history, full of character, a war memorial which was very well attended, a little fountain which worked, and then we strolled down the streets, and dominating all was the castle, a very imposing building. But some of these old houses really were lovely. It hadn't changed, this place hadn't changed for centuries. The climb up to the castle was quite something. We all got up there, puffing gently. But the castle walls, domineering as ever, but the view from the top was quite stunning over the river Aveyron. Inside the castle, as you can see, it's just a shell, but the walls and the towers are still standing, and one can gauge roughly what it must have been like in the 12th century and years before and after. Inside there's a wonderful model of a castle, the castle of how it looked with all its walls, fortifications, towers, and was very impressive. There you can see a knight approaching with guards in the doorways, a catapult, sentries and soldiers guarding the ramparts. Great care had been taken to build this. Every doorway had a sentry, soldier on guard. It really was very interesting. And now, away from the past and back to the present, we're in the coach again and off to yet another location. On our way we stopped to look at a magnificent gorge and river, houses, fortifications built right on the top of the cliff. They really did know how to build, the French, and how to get the equipment right to the top of these precipitous cliffs. And we arrived at our next stop was the Chateau de Marguerite, which was very, very impressive. It was built in the 13th century and is one of the few surviving examples of fortified architecture of the region, with this half-timbered overhanging gallery where defenders could fire arrows at any attackers. Our charming guide explained the history of the place and how they had taken it on and renovated it as an ancient 13th century dovecot, and we had some wine tasting there, which was lovely. Following day we moved on to yet another occasion, and this was the town or ancient city of Corrèze. Corrèze is a superb medieval walled town from the 13th and 14th century. The occasion why we're here. Cobbled streets and old buildings. It has changed very little from years gone by. The most wonderful panoramic view from the top, where a whole group of lovely French schoolgirls made their presence felt by chattering away, thoroughly enjoying themselves. This was a very relaxing and enjoyable visit. We just strolled around, lapping up the history. Once again, there was a model of the city or town as it used to be in the 12th, 13th centuries, beautifully made, full of detail. There's inside the walls, the houses, towers. People realising it's 3:05. The detail that go into these models is really very, very good. There's a wooden gallery where defenders could stand and shoot down arrows at attackers without being hit themselves. Really was very interesting. So out of the past and into the present again, we make our way further through the town. Some very impressive architecture, some very nice restaurants, some wonderful old buildings again. Standing outside one of the main gates, we can see just how heavy the fortifications were. And then onwards yet again to the Ville de Castres. The town of Castres is built around the river, about which trade flourished in earlier years. The noise you can hear is a weir in an unusual form of a V. Always attracts attention. Many old houses overlook the river. The town was famous for weaving and tanning, and boats would load up direct from these buildings and make their way to coastal ports.
You drive up to it and you can just see it. Looking at on top of the hill.
In the centre of the town is the Prince Jean Jaurès, who lived here and was the founder of French socialism. Fortunately, it was a lovely day, and with the bell sounding for 10:30, I think it was, we got a chance to look at Jean and his statue. There he is, commemorated forevermore. Chartres has some lovely old streets and buildings, but today was market day and round and about as usual. And then we're off yet again to a lovely little place called Saint Cirq Lapopie. It's a beautiful village of ancient houses perched high above the river Lot. Church ringing out bells for a service of some description, and looking down on the village it just looked like a model. Only the cars and people give it away. Wonderful view of the river and the gorge du Lot, which cuts through the limestone for miles. The village had a castle, but there's not a great deal of it left now, other than a crumbling ruin on the very top of the hill. It was nevertheless a very, very picturesque spot. And then we were off once again. Countryside getting more hilly and mountainous with some wonderful trees. And we came to Rocamadour, which is another ancient town perched high on a rocky outcrop. I continually wondered how on earth the builders could get all their equipment right up to these precipitous cliffs. Stonework, woodwork, and so on and so forth. Really quite extraordinary. Very similar to many of the other towns, with its narrow streets and old houses. Extraordinary place. And then we moved on yet again to a place called Ceriat, which is an old market town, deep in the heart of the Dordogne Valley. Today is boat trip day for a nice change. The boats are built in the traditional style of years gone by, when the river was the main trading route. We hopped on board our boat, and another one was leaving at the same time, which gave me a good filming opportunity.
You have big variation. During the summer, it's 25 cubic meters versus 100 times more. And
you will hear our guide chattering away in the background.
You can see above the tree 3 windows, and there it's an habitation trangulate. You had the prehistoric men living there, and after it was just right in the wall. You can see the 3 window, and you have at least 100 years old war. 100 war. On your left, on the top of the cliff, you see like a discoloration of the rock. The 17th January of 1957, a widow, we say, a man, it was well known. They were calling him the little, and they have the window with the cross of stone, which is called fenêtre à meneau, window menu. No, actually no. It's an English company who rent it. It's £3,917.
This was a very impressive boat trip, very leisurely, lovely change from being in the coach. Fantastic cliffs either side. The River Dordogne is a big one. It eventually flows and joins the River Garonne near Bordeaux.
Really, clean. You have no industrial pollution on the river.
There's Henri.
More than 30 different species of fish living in the river, and because here you had a way, it was clean, no vegetation, and they had to pull with a rope the boat. They were doing, and the current to go up.
We weren't the only people on the river. Local natives in their canoe.
Lalos, it's a weight. It's between 500 and... And she was well enough for the 12 children that she was taking care of in the region. And you can still visit there. Went back.
That was a wonderful castle chateau built on the top of the hill there.
You're going to have of course, it's a region of Léonore of Aquitaine, who was married first on the 2 sons. 2 are really ready. Yes. And now the part who has not been rebuilt, it's because they don't find any trace, of the map. The map knows the plains.
Natives are obviously friendly. Having turned round at the bridge, we're now retracing our steps. It just shows you how impressive it is as we come slowly into the landing stage. And back on dry land again, we take another look at this interesting place after a very enjoyable few hours gently going up and down the Dordogne, and then it's back into the coach again for the following day, and this is the big one and the highlight of the entire trip. We're passing through what they call the Black Mountains on our way to a very, very special place. The fantastic walled city of Carcasonne. This aerial view gives you a complete picture of it. But this is what it's like when you're approaching. The coach was stopped so we could get a view of this wonderful old city. Just literally, you're going back in time to see what it must have been like for travellers, soldiers, etc., to come across a complete medieval walled city. This is not Hollywood, this is real. It's towers, double walls, turrets, cathedral inside the walls, all the houses. Everything is exactly as it was in the 1200s. And here's the main gate. Again, just as it was, with the twin towers of Nabonnaise.
Down this road here, and you'll see where the bus is parked. And you're meeting me at 2:15.
Our guide telling us where to meet. I left the party here and did some filming. I wanted to get as much film taken as possible in the short time we're here. Just look at these walls. I walked around the outside of the city, and as each large tower you came across turned round the tower, and then it went on exactly the same, wall after wall, tower after tower, with its battlements, towers, walls that extended a complete mile round the city, and its inner walls, which extend about 3/4 of a mile. This city was considered totally impregnable around about the 1300s. It was impossible for an army to take it. When the English were here during the 100 Years' War, the Black Prince and his army camped outside the city for some weeks and then decided it was going to be too difficult to take and marched on. There's one of the Barbicans, a rounded area where soldiers could stand and fire arrows. One of the gates, huge towers. You can see the arrow slits in the walls. This, remember, is the inner wall. If anybody did get into or managed to scale the outer walls, then they had the problem of scaling the inner walls. See the arrow slits there? You can just see the towers of the outer wall. Now this was rather interesting. A surrey with the fringe on top type thing. A very sensible way to view the walls. It was an extremely hot day that day, the sun beating down out of a clear blue sky, but it was wonderful. This is the view you had from the outer wall battlements, and you could see that the defenders could see an army approaching for miles. Looking along the walls, every now and again there's a tower. There's another Barbican. Down the bottom you can see the remains of where the moat would have been. This was a fantastic sight, a place I've always wanted to visit, and now I was here. That's the outer wall. Imagine if you got up there, then you had to climb that. And all these towers were engineered so that soldiers could give crossfire and cover the complete area. As I say, the place was considered impregnable. Built by the finest architects and craftsmen of the day who specialized in fortified castles. I stood and gazed up at these walls in absolute wonderment. You see it on films where soldiers arrive with scaling ladders and start climbing up. But just imagine trying to think about doing that. Just along here is a jutting piece. No doubt had its purpose, but there's all sorts of arrows, not arrows, all sorts of slits for people, soldiers and defenders to hurl either boiling oil or boulders or whatever else they had. Absolutely marvellous. Some of these walls go back to Roman times. It's been built on and refurbished and built up again over the centuries, but a lot of the foundations are Roman and then built on by the early builders after the Romans left, and the brickwork, stonework and cement that they used is still as good as it was when it was built. There's been no need to change it. Some wonderful gargoyles situated every now and again, and also one has to watch out for traffic. Great idea. If I ever come here again, I shall join that bus. You can walk all the way around the area between the outer and the inner wall, and of course it just keeps on looking the same wherever you go. It's the same wonderful walls, towers. You can see the ledge for defenders to stand on and shoot their arrows. Rebuild borders and knock scaling ladders down. This is a castle area where the boss man of Carcasonne lived. You can see how wonderfully impressive it is, and then you can drift back into time to imagine the knights and their soldiers trotting down the pathway with the walls in the background. Possibly to a jousting tournament when there was no danger of war. But back to the future, or the present. And we go through that marvellous entrance into the old city itself, with of course its very narrow streets, specially designed to keep the number of invaders down to 1 or 2 abreast. It had its own cathedral, of course. Wonderful building, built in the 11th century. Beautiful rose window. There's wonderful columns of craftsmanship and the workmanship and everything that went into building something like this way back in the 11th century. Wonderful. Back in the present again, we take a final look at the myriad of tourists who are there, back in, out, this time the entrance, and take one last look at these magnificent walls of the city of Carcasonne. And as we leave, the coach stopped again so we could take a final look at it. A wonderful sight.